What is the crack, guys? It's Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So today what I wanted to talk to you about was the Targe, or the Irish Targe to be more specific. So the Targe is commonly associated with the Highlanders of the 17th and 18th century. Most people who would have seen it in popular culture and popular media would see the traditional kind of 19-inch leather-bound shield. But this shield itself, while yes it is Scottish, has a pretty much identical counterpart in Ireland. And I'll kind of dive into the reasons why that is. Already kind of touched on them previously in some of the videos, but I really want to kind of show you the hows and whys of that. So probably the best place to start with the popularity of small round Irish shields is obviously the Bronze Age versions of these that I'll show now on screen. So there is a number of small round bronze shields found in Ireland. It shows that that particular style of quite small, not large Viking style shields, but quite small shields were very popular in Ireland, and probably the only real image we have of a early medieval Irish warrior is in the Book of Kells, which I'll show now, where he is armed with a spear and a very small, almost buckler-like shield. Some might say it's a Targe, but that's for other people to debate about. So that's where things start to get quite interesting. So the best place to really look at what is a Scot and what is an Irish or a Gaelic Irish, whatever term you wish to use, is probably the Holland Chronicles. So this is a kind of collection of different literary types and sources from the, I believe, the mid-1500s. I'll double check that and put the exact date on screen for you. But basically this is one of the few sources that we have that actually shows imagery of Scots at the time. Actually has some references as well to the clothes they are wearing. Now, interestingly, going on from the last video on the Lena, you'll actually see in this photo, in this picture, that these guys are actually wearing Lena. And they're also wearing the inner, which is going to be in the next video, which is very much the traditional Irish jacket. And a lot of debate amongst various academics seems to be around what were the differences between the Irish and the Scots at this point. Now, the best kind of opinions that I could see is that they were basically almost identical, almost indistinguishable. Their languages were very much the same, their weaponry is very much the same, and their clothing and culture was very much the same. Now this is, by the 1500s, you're talking about 200 plus years of back and forth, not just trade, but settlement, conquest, war, going both ways across the channel. So it wasn't simply a case of the Scots coming here and invading and then implanting their culture. There was also Irish raids and settlement into Scotland and back and forth over periods of hundreds of years. So it comes to a point where, from outsiders looking in, that they're almost indistinguishable. And this is kind of something I wanted to refer to in the video on the Lena, but I just forgot to at the time. So the Holland Chronicles is a really fascinating source on how the Irish looked at the time. So one of the things I wanted to go over was where the Targe starts to appear in references in Irish literature and literature about the Irish. So one of the earliest sources that I found with a reference to this was the Siege of Rouen in France, where there was an Irish retinue working for the British Army at the time. Now, I haven't been able to find the exact passage, so I'm not going to quote it. Instead, I found this nice little passage that is quite commonly referred to and quite commonly looked at as how the Kerns were equipped in the 1500s. And this comes from John Dimmock, and he served for the Earl of Essex, who was Elizabeth I, Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. And he provides this description. So the Kern was, and I quote, a kind of footman, slightly armed with sword, a target, aka a targe, in other words a round shield, of wood, or a bow and a sheaf of arrows with barbed heads, or else 3 darts, which he cast with wonderful facility. Now, the darts are going to be a video in their own right, but it's something interesting to see that even at that time, the Targe or the Target, where possibly we get the word target, starts to appear. So, round, circular boss. Now, this brings us on to the Targe in question and the Targe that you've came here to see. So, there is the O'Donovan Targe, which is, I still believe, in the ownership of the O'Donovan family of Lissard. And this is a circular shield that's bound in deer skin with a wooden base of about 19 inches in diameter, and it's reputed to have belonged to the last chieftain of the O'Donovan family in the 16th century. It is studded with brass nails and an arrangement of a sexfoil design. It has a brass boss or umbo, about 1 inch in height in the centre, and this comes from the Journal of the Royal Historical and Archaeological Association of Ireland, 1879 to 1882. So, as you can see, this shield that I'm about to show you, and this is not the original, this is a replica made by a wonderful man himself over at Alba Targes, and this is it. So this is the O'Donovan Targe. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit of it here. So as you can see, Graham over at Alba Targe has done an incredible job of replicating this, and here is the backside, and this is, in my opinion, even more impressive. I'll show you a few pictures now on screen of how this is made, but generally almost all targes are made roughly in the same way. So you have 2 layers of wood, sometimes more, which are overlapping in different directions. So one is going this way and the other on the opposite side is going like that on top of it, basically at a right angle to it. And this means the wood's a lot stronger, very much in the way the modern plywood is made. And generally there is these sort of geometric patterns that are done on top, usually to denote where the person's from or just stylistically. Covered in leather, sometimes in deer hide, and normally with deer hide on the back. And then this part here, the padding, which is where the forearm sits, is usually stuffed with straw. Now I know there's all sorts of superstitions and rumours and kind of words around how these are used and various different designs and kind of little details involved with these when it comes to Highlanders. But in Ireland we actually have, interestingly, quite a few different pictorial sources of these. Probably the most interesting in my opinion, which I'm actually discussing with Graham at the moment, which would be an idea for me to start a Patreon to help fund it, is to recreate the Targe of Sir Neil O'Neill, which I'm going to show on screen now. So this thing, one of those interesting topics, and Graham's first question to me was, is he really small or is the Targe really big? I would say probably a bit of both, but as you can see in the picture, the Targe is almost up to his waist, which makes it very different to any of the Targes that we're quite used to. But I also doubt that he had 18 or 19 inch legs, so chances are it's a little bit bigger. So the Targe itself appears quite a bit in various different forms. So the interesting thing when it comes to the Targe, we associate this as a Targe. However, there was a lot of different versions and things that would just be referred to as a Targe. Basically any sort of round shield, usually worn on the forearm like so a strap and a strap, but which I'll show you an image now. There's loads of different ways that these are fastened to the forearm, which also implies various different uses for them. I know through seeing some imagery there's kind of supposed cavalry ones where you don't really grab it here by the hand to allow kind of use of reins and stuff. It actually kind of sits across the wrist. However, the interesting thing and the really nice thing with this Targe here, which really goes to show how well these are made, and I will leave a link to Alba Targes in the description, is that your hand kind of basically gets wedged in here, so I don't actually have to grip this at all. Your hand really just stays solid in it. Really, really lovely little detail. And even if you were to have a really big or really small arm, the way the strap's set up does sit really comfortably on the arm. I did actually plan on testing this against various weapons, arrows and all that sort of stuff, but it's such nice shields that I don't think I will. But Again, something that we might try finance in the future to actually test out. However, and this is giving you a very, very small sneak peek into a project I'm working on. In the very near future, we do plan on testing out wicker shields and how these hold up, because there's a lot of references to wicker shields being used in Ireland, and I have yet to see anyone test them. So stay tuned for more information on those, which there will be some very, very fun and interesting projects on the way. So anyway, back to the Targe itself. As I said, there is a few different pictorial bits of evidence of these in Ireland. There's also a few different references to them. So one of the real interesting ones is obviously in John Derrick's image of Ireland. There's actually a guy on the Irish cavalryman on the ground, and you can actually see with the way he's fallen, all the strapping in the inside and the backside of the shield. Now, whether or not this is just simply a round shield or, you know, a targe as we've come to know it, is kind of one of those things for debate. But there is, very interestingly, in the Battle of Yellow Ford, there's a depiction of that from the time. Now, I will do a video on the Battle of Yellow Ford as well, because it's a really big and important battle in Irish history. But you will actually see the men of Hugh O'Neill in the bottom left hand corner of the picture with targe and sword. Now, it's very hard to make it out, but they were referred to as such, as his targe and sword men. So you can actually see them in the picture with those. So that brings me on to final little bit, and this is kind of a little two-piece thing that I want to touch on. So the first, I want to personally thank Ben Miller. So Ben has been a huge inspiration and a huge help to me over the past few years. He's also just a really great guy, and he's done some fascinating research into Irish military history, and I would really, really recommend you checking out this book, which is Irish Swordsmanship, Fencing and Dueling of the 18th Century in Ireland by Ben Miller. You'll find this in all major bookstores and outlets. Really, really amazing resource, and I plan on doing dozens and dozens of videos just on certain topics in this, because there's some really, really interesting stuff in this that's been completely glossed over in Irish history, and really important parts that I used to even walk by on a daily basis with work. Didn't even realise how significant they were to Irish history. But what I want to touch on is in chapter 1, basically page 1, which is the last duel fought in Ireland. Beg your pardon, not the last duel, but this also appears in the Holland Chronicles. So really, really interesting little thing with that. So it's the last known instance of trial by combat, and it occurred in 1583 in Dublin Castle, and it was between Conor MacCormac O'Connor and Teig MacGilpatrick O'Connor. And after this single combat like this basically became the duel as we know it, of which, again, some really interesting videos coming up, because Ireland was very much a hotbed for dueling. But anyway, if you want more information on that, stay tuned, or else grab this book, or do both. So this trial by combat that occurred between these two gentlemen was appealed before the Lord Justices, and the appealant did prevail, and he did disarm the defendant, but also with the sword of said defendant did cut off his head, and upon the point of the same sword did present it to the Lord Justices, so that the victory of his enemy he was acquitted. So pretty brutal trial by combat, which ended in a pretty bloody end for one of those involved. So really fascinating little bit there, but also interesting that that duel was fought with Targe, or Target, as it was said at the time, and sword. So obviously quite common, although how common in Ireland we don't know. The interesting thing with the O'Donovan Targe, which is once again this one, there is one in the Ulster Museum which I'll show on screen for you. But the interesting thing about this one is that Ulster is often associated with the Scots, especially with the plantations that happened. So there's very much, it makes a lot of sense that you're going to see a lot of Scottish weapons and weaponry in that part of Ireland. But the O'Donovans are from Munster, which is quite interesting because obviously it's the southern part of the country, so to see these still being used and see these being popular in that part of the country does make you wonder how prevalent and popular they were. Obviously we don't really know, they're not really something that survives too well, but an interesting little thing. So final little bit, and thanks again to Ben for pointing this out. So Ireland in the 18th century had a huge community, or should I say hotbed, of staged gladiators. And these were people who, not gladiators as we came to know in the 90s, but these are basically people who fought on a platform, such as the famous James Figg. And I'll show some pictures both of him, of the platform, and also the Targes used. So, sorry about that guys, I had a neighbour going a bit mental on his car horn there. So, as I was saying, the staged gladiators became hugely popular, and a very famous one, and this might surprise some people, was Mary Welsh. Yes, Mary was a lady, and fought all across England and Ireland with her husband. So, at this time, staged gladiators were known for fighting with essentially three weapons, so the staff or cudgel, the falchion and targe, and sometimes bare fist. There was other weapons sometimes practiced as well, but interesting to see that the targe remained, although slightly changed. So I'll show you a picture of James Figg holding what looks more like a buckler, but interesting things to note. So they did stay on within Ireland, although obviously the practice of arms and the ability to own and possess arms did change very dramatically after the 1600s within Ireland. So unlike in Scotland, where you see the targe become a item of clan identity, it's not really the same in Ireland. So just a very interesting little side note in history, something that I don't think really gets a lot of interest. Really fascinating to me that you have this weapon that's so synonymous with Scotland, yet appears all across Ireland and across a large part of Irish history. So if you're interested in that, guys, if you're interested in learning more, please feel free to get in touch. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. It really does help. The old algorithm gods, they're there to be appeased, so anything you can do to help really does, I really do appreciate. As I said, some really interesting videos coming in the future, and anything you can do to help and support, I really do appreciate. So, as I said, I'll leave links in the descriptions to Ben Miller's book and to Alba Targes, and if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. So once again guys, thank you, and so on.